All right, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Akona. I think you have heard all the speakers just mentioned my name. An associate director within SNG Grant Thornton, specifically looking after economic auditing, compliance, everything ethics from an internal audit point of view, as well as combined assurance. So I'm really excited to be here because I'm also learning myself. And interesting story is that Celestine actually trained me at Ernst & Young.
Wow.
And she's one of the people, even Ria herself, that has seen me evolve like, over the years in terms of like my career. And I liked it like when Agnes like mentioned that you need to continuously reinvent yourself. So from a career perspective, I started my career at Ernst & Young. I spent quite a number of years there. The Mets, like 12 years there. And then I moved off to financial services where I spent 7 years. And for the last year, I've been with the SNG Grant Thornton family, and I'm enjoying it very much so. So I've literally done like full circle. And catch me afterwards and ask me why. So I'm really, I have been taking like notes. So Ria asked, so I did take notes, and I thought it would be awesome, like for us before we start, just to pick up on some few like reflection points, because it's actually useful for us to just reflect from time to time, especially when Ria had that avatar in the end. I kept on thinking, you know, where am I in terms of like this picture? So we started off with Agnes, where she gave us like pearls of like wisdom in terms of we need to embrace, you know, the changes and the challenges that are brought to us, because that's what helps us to actually continuously reinvent ourselves and to actually give us that hunger to learn. So we must not look at our challenges as obstacles, but look at our challenges as opportunities for us to continuously learn and to innovate as well. So that was very, very powerful. She actually spoke about also like the war of talents, that we are doing more with this. What does that mean? Right? I'm not sure if we've got the answers yet, but I hope to hear like during the Q&A session if you've got like a view and opinion on that. Quality also becomes like very important, and in whatever that we're doing, we need to consistently have these quality checks. And am I on the right path? Am I focusing on the right risk? Am I serving my clients or the business the best way that I can? Am I bringing knowledge to the team? Because consistently, our stakeholders are looking at us, you know, for information. And herself, like sitting in assurance as well, she's looking at internal auditors for answers. And then we move then to Celestine to say, as internal auditors, we sit in a very, very powerful position where we get exposures to all the businesses. What are we doing with that information? And that was the question that I asked myself. We need to advise the leaders. So with the new standards actually coming out, there has been a more detailed write-up in terms of like advising. Are we brave? Are we scared? Why are we scared? Is it because we are not equipping ourselves enough like, with the information to give us the confidence to have like, those discussions when we're sitting in front of management? So that is the question that I'm asking myself. We need to be able to lead ourselves, because if we can't lead ourselves, how can we lead the teams, or how can we lead others as well? We need to have a deep sense of what others want. Do we have that? Or do we just want to finish off and order that as well? So I know that in terms of my audits, is that we are driven by audit plans. By the time that October comes, we want to reach 80%, which are without actually thinking what is happening around the world. Which brings me to that. Do we think about what's happening around the world and how it impacts our plan? And when we think about it, what are we doing about So that's the questions that I'm asking myself. And then how do we then influence the business? Can we influence? So all of the business and the organization, do they respect us? Are we that partner, trusted advisor? Do we collaborate? And just touched on combined assurance. Are we thinking about it? Are we going to do something about it? And then lastly, then when we look at then Ria's reflections into the future, how does future you in 30 years' time look like? What are you doing? So 5 years. It's 5 years for Ria. Yeah, actually gave us a glimpse in terms of like internal audit function, in terms of the trends around cloud governance, generative AI, data governance, shadow IT. Did you know about shadow IT? Or was it just a shadow, just sitting next to the computer? So all of these things, I suppose, I mean, regardless of where you sit in the business, these are the things that we need to actually take stock and reflect on. So which brings me now to Ria's point of saying that we need to be courageous and start by doing the small things, and then we can then achieve big things. So I guess as a start, in terms of like the question, because every time like a speaker speaks, I always want to find out like how do I then practically, I mean, it's a lot of questions, right? How do I then practically implement this? Where do I start? Because I've got a shopping list of things and questions that I need to answer. So I will probably give you all like an opportunity, perhaps as a start, to give your views. Perhaps then maybe starting with yourself, like Celestine. Yes, please, like more experience. So where do we start? There's so many questions, so many reflection points. Where do we start?
Is the question, where do we start to do what? I missed the last part?
Yes, as an internal audit function, where are the areas that we need to start focusing on as an internal audit function?
Right, okay, I got it. I think one of the things I would do if I was in an internal audit function or the head of an internal audit function is actually do an assessment, like a maturity assessment to see where I am and where I should be and where I'm aspiring to. I really like the Ria's video. It also got me thinking. That could be your aspirational where that's probably your level 10 rating. But I would say if I'm where I am today, I would start by actually understanding where am I when it comes to people, to technology, all the things we've spoken about today, and then where I ought to be. That gives me an idea of where the gaps are. It gives me an idea of what I can do, and then using that information to create a roadmap of what I need to be implementing. Because there's so much that we've talked about today. So the question is, where do you start? So that roadmap will help you know what are the quick wins, because there are some things which are quick, so you can, get them done quickly. There are those which are long-term and require a culture change. So you look at those and say, okay, this one will take me probably a year, 2 years. And then there are those things that require huge investments in terms of money. So if you're not at the level you ought to be in terms of technology and you want to have that technology, that means you have to put in extra investment to do that. So I think for me, the starting point would be do an assessment, let it shine where the gap, put some spotlight on where the gaps are. And then from there, create an implementation roadmap, which helps me prioritize what I need to do and the resources I need to deploy on it.
Thank you very much. That's such a valuable advice. Again, it always starts with taking that stock and finding out where you are, what you can do now and what you can do later. And also like the quick wins as well. Agnes?
Okay, I'll be the first one to figure that.
Okay.
That's these things that I talked about. And I think it's very important that you analysis, right, and also setting the vision of where you want to be. I think then going into the implementation aspects, you also have to look at the networks around you. What have other people done and how can we learn from them? So I think oftentimes we want to learn ourselves, right? Learn ourselves, but there's a lot of learning in taking out what everybody else has done. So forums like this, if you're in a network firm, how other network firms have actually done the transition. It's very important.
Sure, that's some useful advice. And so far, I'm not hearing anything from money. Because sometimes we always say like budget, it's budget that actually restricts us. And I'm loving like this practical advice is that, you take stock, you leverage what's existing, you learn, you come to forums like this. So join us as well. Ria?
So I want to make it personal because this to me sounds very pink and fluffy. Apologies, colleagues. My friend, it's too pink and fluffy for that book in it. So for me, it actually starts just with each one of us, and we can start now. It is literally by making sure you've got the guy, the lady, the person that's next to you's number. Reach out tomorrow, pick up on a discussion. It's about your mindset, your attitude. It's about really just thinking about what you do. And I can pick on Mercy today. She's used to me picking on her. Sometimes people have done a section of work and then I use my friend's lesson that I've learned many years ago, which is, so what, Mercy? So what? So sometimes really making a difference in the world, in somebody else's life, in an organization you work with, is to just think about what you're doing and why are you doing it and what does it mean at the end of the day. And it does not need to be such a daunting task. It does not need to cost lots and lots of money, but it's actually really making sure that you're proud of what you've done. And people will notice and opportunities will come your way.
So I guess then my next question is like, now that we've done this, who needs to support us in the organization? Because we spoke a lot, like especially collaboration, which is like a key theme that I've picked up. It's like, who needs to know? Because internal audit, we're not on our own. I suppose then maybe Agnes.
So I think for me, one of the key stakeholders that you need to know and set the strategy is the board committee for those types of governance. Because when they have a very clear strategy of what their expectations are and how things are organization navigating. The other aspect is obviously then the business themselves. And to Ria's point around mindsets, it's not only the heroes that have to change their mindsets, it's also the businesses that we operate in and how they see internal auditors in general, understanding the value that they bring to the organization. So I would say those two from an external perspective and obviously the internal audit functions on. So for the chief audit executives to make sure that the team around them is aware of the agenda that we take.
A great response. I suppose then it then links then to my question with Celestine. It's like when the boards, especially at the chairperson of the internal audit function, how does then the board support like this agenda? What does the internal audit function need to bring when they are coming to present? And I liked it actually when we said, was more often than not, internal audit is at the bottom of the agenda, and they given 10 minutes quickly to respond, and then it's business as usual. And I always say, the audit committee this is where we actually report. It's like a reporting structure, and we should be given like airtime. So I suppose like my question like to you is like what kind of like support, like what are the conversations typically that happen at the board level regarding the support?
Thank you. I think, and it starts from the first question you asked when I was talking about maturity assessment. I've often found, especially if you do it properly, or let's say get someone to do it for you and it's presented to the board, it gives it the credibility that is needed to make the investment you want. Because sometimes when you just go and say, I have a gap here, I want to transform my function, somehow the board doesn't take you seriously and the rest of management doesn't even want to allocate resources to you. But if you collaborate with the chair of the audit committee and even the audit committee, then you have the support. So to your question specifically then, the areas of support, one of them you just mentioned, which is prioritizing internal audit, because not everybody in the board appreciates the important role of internal audit and giving them the space. So that's why I was saying for me, I make it deliberate. So if we have 4 meetings in a year or 5, half of those internal audit and risk management, let's say risk management is also part of the terms of reference of that particular committee, they come first so that we allocate appropriate time to them. The second thing is pre-audit meetings. I liked doing that for 2 reasons. One, to help me get up to date with what the issues are. But in the process, we get to sit with the chief audit executive, trying to guide where necessary. And a lot of them know our background. So they'll say, what do you think? What are the kind of templates you're thinking of? How should I focus? So we use that prep time to guide them. And then when they come to the audit committee, not only are we aligned, but they're able to present something with impact. Then the last one I wanted to point out was the positioning of audit. If the audit committee and the board don't position audit appropriately, in spite of, because we have standards which say that internal audit should be positioned appropriately, but not all boards and management understand and support that. So I think one of the things that boards should do, audit committees should do, is ensure that the audit function is appropriately positioned at the executive level, because I have one company where the internal auditor does report directly to the audit committee, but functionally, like administratively, their level is still low. So we've ticked the box that they report to the audit committee, but when this person wants to have a meeting with or support their team, their level is lower than the other directors. So I think that's one of the things that the board and audit committee should do. Prioritize the position of audit, give them sufficient airtime and underscore their importance, and then just, prep and be sort of a mentor and coach. I think we need to be available as a mentor and coach, especially to the chief audit executive.
And that's such great insights, Steve. And it touches and aligns like to the new standards where there's the essential conditions now that have been put in place for boards as well as senior management. And I like the new standards because now it's given us an opportunity to engage with the board to say, look, in terms of the IIA standards, this is how we need to support you. So I suppose now it's like a great opportunity for us to have like this discussion, especially since the beginning of like January, they've become like fully effective. So that's actually like one of the to position like the internal audit function. And I know like sometimes, it's always been like a discussion like for some of our clients to say, look, the IIA standards, they talk about the chief audit executives, but yet at the client level, you find that there's no chief audit executive, but there's an internal audit manager. How is then that gap reached? Because like, I mean, obviously the internal audit manager is the highest level of the internal audit function. So I suppose that those are like the conversations that need to be had. So I've got a question here from, I hope I'm pronouncing the word, Freda. What is the best approach to get management in the organization to assist internal audit department to improve efficiencies and processes? Maybe Leah,
What's the best way to?
best approach to get management in the organization to assist the internal audit department to improve efficiency and processes?
It's absolutely, for me, start with a common goal and a common understanding of what value internal audit can bring. And a recent experience for me was where a client asked us to get involved in doing a specific piece of work that was extremely daunting and a very short space of time. And what made that successful was that both internal audit and the client had a common goal to say we have to get this done, and we just focused laser sharp at that. So for me, even with that, it is about bringing back that strategy, the understanding of what internal audit can bring, and then to say to business, we're not your enemy, we're here to work with you and make the organization better. It is much harder when you're coming from a low base. In other words, where unfortunately your predecessors as internal auditors maybe have not done good work or has not added value. If you are the person that really wants to make a difference, you do start with a low base. But then it's also about what Celestine actually said earlier, which is the pink and fluffy stuff. Do the current state assessment. Actually sit with that person and say, how is it at the moment? How can it be? And I can only do this with you. And this is what I would need. And it's sometimes really tough conversation to admit that we're coming from a low base. So, Celestine, you want to add?
Ray, I couldn't add. I think you put it well, that you need to influence them. You know, this is now when that stuff influence them to see the importance of the audit function. I couldn't agree more.
Another key stakeholder of ours in these days, some of like the engagements that we have, management insists that we put it through that you will engage with external auditors. I'm posing this question to you, and it's like when you there sitting from an assurance point of view, and you're engaging with internal audit, what would you like to see? And what have you found like expressed? Because I know that you never engage with us. There's other internal audit functions where it is in the agenda of the board, like as part of the management's agenda. Yeah.
So I think, and being in many organizations, we find different internal audit functions and different levels of readiness. So I think even in medical management, there needs to be an appreciation that, first of all, the assurance providers with different objectives. So from an external audit, we are focusing on the risk that affects the financial statements, and that is what we look at. Even when we are looking at controls, we are looking at controls around the risk that we've assessed on the financial statements. And so then internal audit will focus on the other aspects, the other risks. Similarly, the other assurance providers, depending on the level of assurance that's required. I think for me, what's been successful in engaging with internal audit is, first of all, getting a chance to discuss the plan. And obviously, you sit in the audit committee, so you also know the changes in the plan and how they approved and the reasoning for it. You also sit in the positions where you hear some of the audit committees pushing back and saying that this is a risk, but I don't see that there's sufficient focus on that, right? And from an external audit perspective, what has worked has been where we're involved. We say we will be doing this. We agree on the timing because it affects the level of reliance we can place. We agree on the methodology. We agree on the extent of testing. Right? And then obviously there's then the opportunity to look at the file and then reperform the work so that we can then be able to place reliance on the entire so being involved before the engagement starts, as opposed to we've done it, external audit reliance now rely. And oftentimes I think in the IT space it's actually a very key aspect we want to see external audit rely. There's also in some instances direct assistance as well. Maybe to audit the ability to be in the place of that meeting. So working together, but it's really open communication and being involved. So not coming at the end and saying we can't learn.
I like Agnes's response in a sense that reliance is such a big word that is used, that you can't rely. And sometimes, like if you sit in the internal audit function, you think this is because I don't think enough. And when you are taking us through like this explanation, at least like some of us are taking notes in terms of like what would actually be required in order for external audit like to place that reliance. Again, I'm hearing again collaboration, that engagement, the prompt discussions, and that's continuous. So I'm not sure if there's any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask.
Akona?
It's that.
Yeah, there was a question on I think how you balance between what the board is looking for in terms of giving it assurance and also ensuring that, I think someone said lower risk is looked at. I thought that was an important question. Could I address it now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought it was an interesting question in the sense that, once we've done a risk assessment and, you come with what you could call lower risk. So in terms of the risk appetite set by the board, there are things they have agreed that as an organization we will look at, and then there are those that we will not prioritize in terms of resource allocation. They're still important. But so what I wanted to say is the current approach, in my view, calls for spending appropriate time to the things that matter. And that includes what is seen as the big stuff as well as what is seen as the small stuff. But with the advancement in technology, there are ways, smarter and more efficient ways, in which we can retain focus on the smaller issues through advanced analytics, predictive analytics that help us continuously monitor and report on those things, which I don't want to use the word lower risk, because lower risk automatically actually means why am I looking at them in the first place? But for example, breaches of segregation of duties around approvals, cash and things, they might look small, but the way those controls work, it is easier to provide assurance using technology. So I guess the challenge to us as auditors today is how do we leverage technology to continue to give coverage on those tasks which don't require higher cognitive effort, right? So you need to look at that, because if something goes wrong there, then it starts permeating through the organization and creating a culture of we can abuse the little small stuff. No, we don't want that. We need to keep a focus on that. What we are saying is in today's world with technology, which is happening at a time when so much data is being generated, businesses are moving fast. How can we keep a focus on that whilst maintaining a focus on the big stuff? So it's a balance. So it's not that we are not looking at it. I just thought I would answer that.
And
to
since these
provide clarity.
I think there's what I want to add to that is we need to challenge ourselves as auditors to find innovative ways of seeking the assurance that the board is looking for. Because even though it's maybe a risk that is ranked lower, it still needs to be evaluated and assessed. But you do not need to do the same method of assurance that you would have done for something else. It could be surveys, it could be interviews, it could be a different method, or like you say, evaluating evaluating trends. It does not need to be a typical old, I almost want to say old school audit. There could be different ways of getting the same level of assurance. We've got a question from you have a question.
Hi, so I'm going to preface my question with a disclaimer that I don't know the answer to the question. It's really something I'm struggling with in terms of in general, the old standards and the new standards. So in the context of obviously the board's responsibility, they have fiduciary duty to the company. And as internal auditors, we need to assess governance, risk, and internal controls of which the board forms a part of. Now, we have seen events where board members have acted inappropriately in terms of their responsibility and on basic charging. I'm going to mention names, but so the question really stems around, how does the internal audit report? Because that's in the most extreme, but in a lesser context, there could be situations where you would report something, and if it needs to be disclosed to the public, it could create damage to the reputation of the board members, even if they're not directly involved in it. So, unlike external auditors who are able to report to IRBA in terms of reportable irregularities and so forth, it's an area that I'm struggling with. We would internal audit report.
I'll try. So I think for me, like something like that with even apply to laws and regulations. There is also the reportable irregularities is in the Audit Profession Act, but in the ethics, the ISO code, we all have the responsibility to assess NOTRA, right? To your point, assess the public interest in the matter. So I guess that one affords you to the opportunity to actually discuss with management and the board and all these things before you actually report, right? Whereas with the RI, we have to report first and then come back. So there is that mechanism to also go through, so that it's not that you report to the same people that are doing it.
I would like to use Steve's wisdom actually. Sorry, yeah. Madam?
Yeah, if I got the question correctly, it's about, whilst external audit have a conduit through which their reports get, are exposed and people can see the work done. Is the question, how about internal audit? Where can internal audit report to? Is that the question?
Particularly if you are working in a situation where management or the individual board members themselves, or you may be questioning their ethics or their integrity.
So before Celestine responds, I also want to maybe Celestine in your response, touch on, because we always talk about these board performance evaluations.
Sorry, just say that again.
So maybe in your response, we always talk about these board performance evaluations that need to take place. Maybe in your response, you can touch on that. How does that fit in as well?
Okay. Yeah, so that's actually a difficult question because It is true, sometimes you have very difficult audits where a senior executive is probably the subject of that difficult audit, or even a board member. So what is the conduit? So theoretically, and I'm going to say theoretically, is the fact that the audit committee, internal auditor has access to the board, not just the audit committee, means that they can access one of the members to support them. And this is, I'm saying in theory, I haven't really seen it. Because I've seen where sometimes internal auditors is so cowed that the report disappears, or the matter is never discussed at all. But what we've said is the audit committee has access, the head of audit has access to the audit committee and essentially then to the board. So through that, they can get someone then to support them. The other thing that happens and how internal audit voice is heard, but it's indirect, it's not direct. Let's say even when you look at integrated reports, the audit committee does report on its activities. And one of the activities they report on is that they reviewed the plan, the audit plan, approved it, and they reviewed the audits. It's not enough because it really doesn't say much. But through that, you are communicating to the general public that is a process from a governance point of view that has been undertaken. It is then further supported by the risk management section of the report, which reports on its risks and the adequacy of controls, which then infers, that someone has looked at it. So when it comes to that, you actually, there's no direct, communication in terms of the work done. But when it comes to back to the question around sensitivity, the only access the auditor has is actually through some of the board members directly on the matter to be looked at. On the matter of board evaluation, if I heard you correctly, Akona, was the question how they are done or what we do with the outcome of those reports when they are not favorable? What was the question?
Yes, yeah. Like the outcome.
Okay. So I have the opportunity, some of it while I was still in the profession, to have actually conducted board evaluations. And now I am on the other side also where we are being evaluated. And one of the things that I think we ought to improve about board evaluation is especially the peer evaluation, because to be honest, I think once we become very friendly with each other, we find we give ourselves 4.5 and 5 ratings. And I've always wondered, I look at this board member and I say, surely not. And yet you see someone has got, a good rating. And it makes me question, the board evaluation process and how it can be changed. We still need to do the peer evaluation, but we can augment it with other tools, during the board evaluation process. And that could be through how we ask questions of how a board member has done. So I quite like one we did recently where they were asking questions you couldn't run away from. So there was no way, for example, I could rate Ria a 5, yet the question is so specific that I have to answer it in such a way that it ends up giving the right answer. But in some areas, when people don't get a good rating, they challenge it. My experience so far, and I must say I'm fortunate to sit on boards that actually take the board evaluation seriously. 2 things happen. The individual feedback, like I have one now. In fact, I got an email last week. Each one of us gets an email which says, this is your feedback. There's a meeting that has been set for you and the chairperson to discuss that feedback. And through that, they'll say, these are the feedbacks you got. This is what you should be doing more of. This is what you're doing right, etc. So that has to happen at an one-on-one. Then the collective one, the outcome of that in terms of the actions becomes a standing agenda on the board. So every quarter we look at what were the actions, what have you done to resolve them, and we keep on going until the next year. But it has to be, as we all know, everybody in the room, it's actually the effectiveness of it is determined by the tone at the top. So if the tone at the top doesn't think it's a serious thing, and let's say it's financial services in some country and you have to do it, they'll do it, but really no serious actions will be taken.
Climate stop is so important, and I see it everywhere. And Celestine, it links back to what you said earlier around leading yourself.
Yeah.
You know, often when, and I mean, being a consultant or in an auditing firm, you know, you have the benefit of interacting with so many different clients. And the one thing that I often say to myself, oof, I'm so happy I'm not on their payroll. Because of what you see is you actually realize how the people are getting treated.
Mm-hmm.
And then you realize that in certain functions, just because the individual leading that function is a good leader, a well-balanced person, they care about the team and they prioritize, etc., they have a very different culture than the next one. And it's the same with audit committees, boards, etc. I've had over the years the opportunities to work with excellent audit committee chairs. And then I also had the opportunity to work with extremely inexperienced audit committee chairs. And it really makes your life easier or more difficult. But it still means, as an internal auditor, you have the responsibility to engage, to have the conversation, to challenge, to ask. And don't underestimate that maybe in the moment when you challenge or ask a question, you don't get the answer, but it doesn't mean you didn't make an impact.
Yeah.
Because people think about what you said.
Yeah. In fact, an interesting one, Ria, was one of the board evaluations came through. This is one board, which is a group. So I sit at the holdings level and all the various boards submitted. And there's this particular subsidiary where the overall performance of the board was almost like 4.8. This subsidiary for the last 3 years has been underperforming. And our question was, hang on, are you disassociating yourself from the outcome of that business? Because, and it goes to our whole SWOT. So you've rated yourself, 4.8, but this is a business that has for 3 years not delivered the results. Our question is, do we have an effective board with challenges? Because if the business is not doing well, maybe you should have changed the CEO by now, or there could have been some radical change. So ultimately, the results, as a board, you're accountable for the results. So you can't have a board evaluation where you've all rated yourselves like you're walking on water, but you're walking actually on sand,
I hope that answers the question. So I am conscious of time. We need to just wrap up. So perhaps with other people questions
On the audience, online.
online.
Yeah, go for it, please.
So, ask, maybe please explain how the three lines of defense engage with boards and committees.
That's a loaded question. But 3 lines of defense. Celestine, come on. I'll give
Okay.
you 2 books of wine.
So this depends. So can I just tell you, there are some organizations that are mature and have well understood, they understood the concept of line of defense, and they're able to report on them, because you must have a fairly well-defined risk and control framework. So you have your strategy as an organization, your business, and it's defined, and we know this line, which is first line operations, this is what you do. Second line, which is your risk compliance, this is what you do. Third line, an internal audit. So it is more sophisticated in financial services, I find, in banking, in insurance, and less sophisticated as you go into less regulated entities where they haven't quite defined it. But the way they engage is when you have a well-defined risk and control framework, then it means that as management gives its reports, because like one of the boards we sit in, we get management to present, then, they own the controls, they've defined the controls, they understand the risk, and they're able to work on them. I remember that particular client where we had to help them come up with the controls, but it's management that has to come up with the controls. They're the ones who have to do the CSA, continuous control self-assessment. So they own it as first line because they're the ones who design the controls, they own it. And then the second line, which is risk, then goes and checks, is it the right control? Have you implemented it? Is it enough? And then audit does the independent assurance. So I must say there are varying levels of maturity and therefore effectiveness. And it's still a work in progress, especially in the non-financial services sector. But Ria, I don't know what you think, and Agnes, but you do need a well-defined risk and control framework that is understood by everybody, what its role is and what their own roles are in working on that.
You spot on, Celestine, and I've always encouraged organizations that all the different assurance functions and risk functions need to work from the same platform or baseline. That there's a common understanding of what those risk and controls are, particularly in your routine, more regular processes and areas of the business. Because otherwise, the different lines of defense will work cross or conflict with each other. So start with having the common understanding.
Definitely. And I suppose it lends itself nicely to combined assurance.
100%. I'm a big fan of combined assurance because it's just not enough. It's just not enough of all of us. And you can't know everything.
No. So as a last point, perhaps each one of you could then, as a party, was give like advice, like in terms of like strategies now, going forward, like for example, function. What would your advice be for internal audit functions in order to allow them to innovate? And perhaps then touch on the strategies to attract and also to retain the skills that we develop in-house.
Can I kick it off?
Yes.
So I think it's it for me comes back to leading yourself, right? Because I know that when I enjoy what I do, the people that work with me share the passion and the care for the work. And I think if each one of us can just own our own piece of the puzzle and make sure we care about what we do, we are proud of our contribution, we apply our minds, that will have a ripple effect like that little stone in the pond. And it will rub off on the people around you, even the people that you think are the ones that maybe don't care. It will have an impact, and and for me, that's how we impact functions, teams, organizations all around us. And personally, I know when I'm at a low point or tired or disengaged because I'm upset about something, it affects the people around me. And I need to keep on checking myself, say, how am I pitching for work today? Even though it's behind the screen, wherever I am, but what is the attitude, the message I'm giving to my team? And making sure that you set the example and that you are aware of yourself and the message you give. And I know we're running out of time, but there's a very short story I want to tell. A week ago, one of the youngsters in the team was telling me they were at a stock tank. We've all been there. And there were old aging stock lines somewhere, and it was not counted. And he just asked them, so why aren't you counting this? This should be on the books, or was it written off, or whatever else? Only to then found out that it's stock that should be on the books, it's aging stock. And they then mobilized the team to go and count it, whatever. And this young man came to me, he says, "You're Tony Real, they actually listened to me and they went to count this stock." Youngster, second year internal auditor. And I said, do you know what that means? I said, do you realize that having the label as an internal audit or an auditor comes with a responsibility? So if you made that observation, yes, it was the right observation. Everything you did was sound. But just remember, it comes with a responsibility, and you are impacting that organization. And then they actually, the head of that function, the word spread, all the different sites, they were counting everything, top to bottom, left to right. But I think we often underestimate how we actually impact people around us. So I just thought I want to share that, because this young man was like, wow. And I'm like, but that is the difference you can make.
Yeah, it's also, as you indicated, leading by example, but also having your team know that they can come to,
Yes.
you know, even if they're encountering something that they've never seen before. They can come to you, they can engage with you, they can differ with you, and they know that they have a space for them to actually engage, because that's when you actually learn. Some of the engagements, you can have training in the classroom, you can have e-learning, but most of the learnings that you have is actually on the ground. And
100%.
I like that, Agnes, when you're saying creating that safe space.
Yeah.
Are we doing that? Yes.
And it's also for the people that we engage with to also understand that we are dealing with humans, right?
Yeah.
Because one day together actually stop does not mean we don't go back.
Yeah.
So it's building that trust and working together. Yeah. You know, sometimes you're in the trenches together, and 5 years down the line, you remember the project.
20 years later.
All right, let's see now. Parting remarks.
Yeah, I think I would agree with the self. I think you must have a passion for this. We are in such a unique position to make a huge impact to any part of the organization, and by extension, the communities in which we operate. So I think us knowing that, sharing it with our peers, sharing it with our teams is motivating enough. So I think that's number one. Number two for me is the so what. That is so important. Always, with whatever level, even that stock take you talked about, RIA or a big issue, it's always thinking, but why? The why. I think this famous motivational speaker, Simon Sinek, he always have the why at mind, and I think that's really important. And then the third thing is just keep learning. We are always learning. I'm a lifelong learner, and particularly the way technology is moving, the world is changing. Just keep learning. Just keep learning to improve yourself, and in doing that, how you can make an impact on others. Thank you.